Our next speaker is Brian Wethington. Brian works for the Bureau of Environmental Services, and he's a landscape architect and environmental specialist. He's, previous to working for the city of Portland, worked for 17 years as a private landscape architect. So his focus and specialty has really been about the integration of urban design and sustainable stormwater solutions, which I think we saw a lot of in the Chicago examples, as well as really what we're aiming and striving for here in the city of Portland. Currently, he is working on revisions to the Stormwater Management Manual here in the city of Portland. He's going to talk, however, today principally about Ecoroofs and our existing manual, and then we'll talk a little bit about what we might be looking at for the future. So please welcome Brian.
Thank you very much, Linda. I feel like I'm kind of in an unfortunate situation here between Michael and Tom, talking about something as perhaps mundane as stormwater regulations, but we'll give it a try. So hopefully I added a little bit of spice to it, but maybe not, we'll see. So today I want to talk about a little bit about why we manage stormwater in the city and how we came to the types of regulations and ordinances that we have here in the city. We'll talk just really briefly about that. And then look a little bit more clearly at how we actually manage the stormwater in the city and what our regulations, our city code, and our stormwater management manual point to in terms of how we manage stormwater, and specifically how Ecoroofs, what the role Ecoroof plays in that particular process. And another thing I thought that might be kind of interesting is looking at Ecoroofs in comparison to some other BMPs that we use in the city to manage stormwater, and how are they actually functioning. Especially considering how the Ecoroof is sort of categorized in the manual. Instead of being really a stormwater technique, it's actually categorized as being an impervious area reduction, which is a little different than planters and swales and green streets. So we can kind of look at that in comparison and see that Ecoroof are actually doing a very good job. And then into the more boring parts of it, I actually am going to quickly go over what the exact requirements are in the stormwater management manual in terms of how Ecoroofs are built and designed. And I think a lot of times we get caught up in these ideas of Ecoroofs are kind of expensive and they're heavy, and it becomes a little bit of a challenge sometimes in development. And what I want to point out in the manual is that it's actually very simple. The layers are very simple. We don't require that much to actually go into an Ecoroof, and that can be done simply. And then look a little bit to the future. Some of the things I can talk about real quick are the revision of the Stormwater Management Manual is in process, so I'll cover kind of what's going on with those. And then it's interesting that Michael talked a little bit about the Seattle Green Factor. We actually did something very similar. We spent about a year looking at the Seattle Green Factor and how it could be applied to the city of Portland. And it's still currently being reviewed, and we'll see what it can do. So I'm sure they had a lot of the similar experiences. So why do we manage stormwater? The reality is that it rains a lot in the city of Portland. Over the last 140 years in downtown Portland, we have over almost 43 inches of rain a year. And interestingly, when I looked at this data yesterday, the last 3 years we've been actually getting close to 50 and over 50 inches of rain a year. So we're experiencing some of the same things that Chicago is in terms of increased rainfall. And that points a lot to the Stormwater Management Manual, because it was really designed back in the late 90s under a slightly different approach to the amount of rainfall that we're getting. And the reality is it's increasing, and so maybe our regulations and our standards have to increase as well. There's also this kind of shifting mindset. It was interesting. We were looking at development in Southwest Portland in the West Hills, and we knew that that whole area developed between 1950 and 1960, and we were looking at how they manage stormwater there, and the approach was they don't. They only manage sanitary sewer, and so water just runs off everywhere across properties. And it's become a real challenge for the city, and how do we go back into those areas and retrofit to manage that stormwater now? And so as our shifting mindset changes over time, our policies will have to do that as well. And a couple of the interesting things I saw back in January, some litigation that's happened down in Los Angeles, the Supreme Court, and also on the West Coast. The categorization of stormwater as a pollutant in some locations. You know, what is pollution? When does that happen? How is it actually managed? In Los Angeles with all these channels, they were saying pollution cannot, or what were they saying, that we're trying to understand when can pollution go into a water body, at what point is it categorized as pollution. And so with all these concrete channels leading into other concrete channels, these conveyance networks that have replaced our natural drainage ways, they weren't considered something that's being polluted. It was just conveying water. And on the East Coast, it was stormwater was considered a pollutant in and of itself. And so I think our mindset here has changed a little bit more in that stormwater isn't a pollutant, it's a resource. It's something that carries pollution away from our city. It's actually something that we should be managed in a positive way because it is actually very useful. And so that's a little more esoteric view of what why do we manage it. The reality is that we actually have to manage stormwater as well. There are a number of federal regulations, state regulations, local regulations, BES policies. And this is just a short list as part of our work on the revision of the manual and our new stormwater program, stormwater system program. We actually developed a paper that's 36 pages long that looks at nothing but the federal, or looks at the regulations that affect our revision of the manual and making sure that we comply with all of them. And every one we looked at was this small little bit of text that says this is what we have to comply with, and it still added up to 36 pages. And without talking about all of them, the two that I want to focus on today a little bit, because all of these things, eventually they're sort of rolled up in how we address it through the Stormwater Management Manual and through our city code. And so, there you go. This is really boring, so I thought I would throw in some interesting things. So, here's a nice picture of Leonardo DiCaprio. Has nothing to do with stormwater, but he's handsome, so. And now the cardinal sin of PowerPoint presentations, the wall of text. So you don't have to actually read all of this. The thing that I wanted to point out is that within our development code, or public improvement code specifically, Title 17, it gives us the city, the responsibility to manage stormwater in a specific way. And what they ask us to regulate is the separation of stormwater from sanitary sewer. And then Title 17.38 actually says that we give BES the responsibility of doing this, and the director of BES has the ability to establish guidelines, and that those guidelines eventually lead to the Stormwater Management Manual. And so through all of that, it points to the 2008 Stormwater Management Manual, which is our most current version, being how we regulate how stormwater is treated. Now, Ecoroofs in particular, it's funny that as I was in private practice, I think I always envisioned Ecoroofs as just being another stormwater management technique. It was something you could do on a roof that managed stormwater. And as I got deeper into the manual, now that I'm working on it, I realized that Ecoroofs actually play a very different role than I had imagined, and it's significant. I think it's important that it's actually an impervious area reduction. So it raises the bar of what that can do on your project, because in a one-to-one ratio, it essentially erases a building away from having to comply with other stormwater regulations. And so there's only a couple things that are considered impervious area reductions, and that's Ecoroof and impervious paving. Within the right-of-way, we can also use street trees, but that doesn't really apply to private property development. And then we also have infiltration facilities, and these are the things that if you don't put an Ecoroof on, if it runs off another impervious area, these are how you manage stormwater. And all of those types of BMPs require engineering. They require going through the simplified or the presumptive approach or the performance approach, the other ways that developers and designers calculate how stormwater is being managed on their site. Whereas Ecoroofs in particular, if you put it on your building, you've managed it. You don't have to think about anything else. You don't have to do anything else in terms of having to comply with the manual. You've done it, in terms of roofs anyway. And this is the stormwater discharge hierarchy. I know this is another one of those walls of text. Again, you don't have to read it all. The point being that if you have put an Ecoroof on your building, you don't have to go through this process. This is what you would do when you have impervious area that you now need to manage before it goes into our storm system or into our rivers or any of the other things that we do. Chapter 1.3.1 in the manual says specifically, stormwater must be infiltrated on-site to the maximum extent feasible, which sort of regurgitates the NPDES permit language, and says that any water that falls on the site needs to go into the ground first. And if you can't do that, then you have to do other vegetated facilities. And again, if you do an Ecoroof, which is a good thing, you don't have to go through this process nearly as much. So one of the things I did want to, as I mentioned earlier, I wanted to take a quick look at. Tim Kurtz in the Sustainable Stormwater Group has been doing monitoring for a number of years, and actually in June, so next month, he'll be releasing the 2012 data. And so this represents the 2010 data, but I asked him yesterday, and he said that this still holds pretty true. Ecoroofs, even though it's not necessarily considered a stormwater treatment device or a BMP, it actually functions very much like it. In fact, does it very effectively. One of the other things that are used a lot are infiltration facilities and flow-through facilities to manage stormwater off of impervious area. And as you can see, it meets our goals for peak flow reduction. It does it very well, and it does a very good job of volume retention as well. And so it holds that water on site longer, and it keeps it out of our system, and means we don't have to spend huge sums of money to actually do something with that stormwater once it gets into our system. And also, like Michael, I hope this is a dialogue too. So if you have any questions that come up as I'm going through this, feel free to raise your hand and ask a question. I'm more than happy to stop. So this leads us to the actual regulation, the 2008 Stormwater Management Manual. And what does it say in that manual about Ecoroofs? Specifically, Ecoroof requirements, again, the sizing, we do have a sizing requirement, and the good thing is that it's a 1-to-1 impervious area reduction ratio. If you put it on your building, you don't have to calculate it any further than that. One of the other things I've actually seen come through permitting and some of the discussions we've had with them is that there have been some instances where people are taking upper roofs and piping them into the lower roofs thinking that that's okay. And the manual specifically says that you can't take another impervious area and dump it onto an Ecoroof. Because it does overload the system. So it's something to think about as you're going through the design process. Another maximum of 25% slope on a building. Alice actually showed me a picture yesterday of a residential project that might be pretty close to that. Might be the first one I've seen. But if you do exceed that, then you actually have to go through the process of documenting how that Ecoroof actually manages runoff. Because early on, when Tom came up with the idea of an Ecoroof, they sort of baked into it the fact that it was managing that runoff. So if you exceed that, then you have to show that it still works. And then all Ecoroof have to be permitted in the city of Portland. And that can be done both under residential or commercial permitting. So one thing I thought I would also show you real quick too is what happens when you submit as a designer or a developer with your project to BDS for review. And the process that they go through in actually reviewing your Ecoroof is they look at the drain layer to make sure that there's one that exists. It does require, the manual does currently require that there is some sort of drainage layer called out, and that it clearly indicates where that water goes in our system. Does it tie into CSO? Does it go to some other system? Whatever it is, it needs to be clearly called out on the drawings. And then they also look at soil layers, the composition of the soil, the weights of it, the depth, how deep is it. We do have a depth requirement in the manual, and I'll get to that in a second as well. We look at the vegetative layer, what type of plants are you proposing to put on the roof. And sometimes that actually comes back to our Sustainable Stormwater Group, and we'll actually look at that during the review process to see what sort of species are being put up there and to make sure that it complies with the manual. And then the amount, how much, what kind of coverage do you have? If you have pots at 30 inches on center, I don't think it's going to get through very easily. But there's other alternatives, cuttings and things like that, and they review that. And I have a little question mark next to the irrigation because we've gotten questions from BDS recently. Right now we do currently require irrigation as part of the manual. But there's been a lot of discussions, and Tom's going to talk about it here shortly. What happens when you design a roof that doesn't need irrigation? How does that get through the process? And so there's still a question to that, and we're trying to work through that. So specifically, the Ecoroof requirements that are in the manual, vegetation has to be drought-tolerant plants. Sedums fit that bill really well. 50% in evergreen species. Again, sedums fit that really well, and you have to have a 90% coverage in 2 years. Cuttings, pots generally seem to do a pretty good job of that, and it is reviewed. You can have a maximum of 10% of non-vegetated components on the roof. That means ballast, access pavers, things like that. And that can be figured into your calculations, and it will be part of the review process. And the growing medium, all of these things are actually in the process of review as we're going through the revision of the manual. 4 inches depth of soil, that is a requirement, but we do see buildings come through on a regular basis that have less than that, and then they are provable, but that is currently the minimum standard. And that relates a lot to volume control, as well as the treatment of the water and those and various things. So it has to be 70% porous, 20% organic, and again, all of these are reviewed through BES at BDS. Pardon me for all the acronyms, and it doesn't necessarily have to comply exactly. These are guidelines. I will say that out loud. Also, you need to have a drainage layer again. Filter fabrics are optional. And I did find this the other day, and someone asked me this question, and I didn't actually know the answer to it, but the growing medium itself can actually be considered the drainage layer. So on smaller roofs, where we've had discussions before, do you need to have a big gravel layer below it or this expensive tile? Perhaps not. And if you can show that it doesn't need it, then that may actually count as the drainage layer. And the whole goal is to actually provide the designers with the idea of having this relatively simple system that meets the stormwater needs. And then a protection layer and root barriers are both optional depending on what type of waterproofing you have and what your system looks like. So that's really it for the components on the roof. It's really simple and it's pretty straightforward, I think. Part of the process that you also have to do is submit an O&M, operations and maintenance, with your submittal. And within those maintenance requirements, you have fertilizers. They can be non-chemical only. Pesticides and herbicides, nope, can't have them, sorry. No, because that'll just go straight into our waterways if that's how the overflow works. Irrigation, again, it currently is required, and we do have standards that say that shall not exceed a half of an inch of water every 10 days, and I think we see a lot of Ecoroofs that when they do have irrigation on them, they tend to have a lot more water than is really necessary, and it's a lot more water than we're asking for within the manual. So as you design those systems, really look closely at how those irrigation systems are set up, because it's not the same as an ornamental area. And then post-establishment, after it's grown in, a quarter inch every 14 days if you choose to keep it. I see a lot of operations and maintenance and submittals through BDS that either skip over irrigation completely or don't address it. And it's okay if you don't want to have irrigation in it. It just needs to be clearly spelled out in the O&M agreement why that's the case and how it's going to be how the roof is going to be established, how it's going to be maintained, and if irrigation isn't part of that, then make a case for it. It can be approved. And then again, for buildings that are more than 5,000 square feet, we've seen that flow meters have actually been really effective in helping monitor that flow and making sure that it works really well. So, lots of boring stuff. I hope it's useful, and to kind of go into looking for some more exciting. Here's a big truck, mud racing. The question is having to do with stormwater. When I put it in there, I thought it'd be kind of fun, and then I realized we actually had a project over on 42nd and Division, a stormwater planter that went in, and 2 weeks after it was constructed, a car drove into it and really badly damaged all the concrete walls. And so in my mind, when I heard about this happening, this was what I saw. Some guy driving through the facility like this, smashing it up. So that does happen, unfortunately. What about, so expanding beyond just the kind of laundry list of things that you have to do to comply with the Stormwater Management Manual, what other benefits do you guys actually get out of putting an Ecoroof on your building in the city of Portland? And one of them is, and I realized I miswrote this, but comply with the green building policy, not in the initiative. And there's a requirement within the city of Portland that all buildings that are built for the city have Ecoroofs on them, and that BES does that on all of our buildings. Fire stations, things like that, are supposed to have Ecoroofs on them. And then you have LEED certification credits. These things will help you with LEED certification. Other green building certification programs, we've talked about that a lot. Floor area bonus ratios, we have a lot of very similar things that Chicago has. And without getting too much into it, one of the conversations we had the other day, Linda and I were talking about it, is now that I had 400 Ecoroofs. I'm sorry, I didn't realize it was 500. Man. But now that we've had this, have we arrived? Have we sort of gotten to that point that all the effort that was put in Tom's efforts in studying it and our incentives, have we finally arrived at the point where we don't need those incentives anymore? Do we not need those floor area bonus ratios? And the reality is that right now the Ecoroof incentive is proposed for elimination in the mayor's budget that was just released. And so if it was adopted today, the incentive would no longer be available. We discussed a little bit about floor area bonus ratios are being considered for elimination by the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. And so in some ways, we've been so successful that we're now thinking, well, maybe we don't need these incentives anymore. And I think we all feel like there really is still a need for those kinds of things to help grow the industry in Portland. And the question is what can those things be? What sort of new incentives or what sort of new bonuses can we come up with? And I think actually it was really nice hearing. I hadn't heard a lot of this stuff from Michael's presentation about what they're doing there in terms of incentives, and there's some really interesting ideas. Maybe we can look at them. So again, in the meantime, other cities are implementing all these new incentives and new programs for Ecoroofs at the same time that maybe we're starting to cut back on them a little bit. And how can we help move that forward? Jumping into the future just a little bit, what's coming down the pike? Again, the Stormwater Management Manual is under revision. This is the first time I've actually said this out loud to public, so hopefully it's okay. But we are currently targeting January of 2014, for a release of a new Stormwater Management Manual. The good thing for a lot of development and designers right now is that really this is only a process and format revision. The only thing that we're really focusing on is preparing ourselves for the larger 2016 updates, which will be, I think I could say safely that it will probably be the most significant update since 1999, or since the original manual. There will be a lot of revisions and double checking to see if we're complying with our current permit requirements from federal and state agencies. And the other thing that's I think is useful to share with you is that the Stormwater System Program has also, besides just the Stormwater Management Manual, which used to be just a project, there was also a project for an overall citywide stormwater master plan. And those two things have been combined into a program so they can actually talk to one another. And over the next couple of years, I'm hoping there's going to be, maybe we can share this next year. I hope there's enough data that we can share it, because it's pretty exciting what they're doing in terms of taking a lot of the same high-resolution data that Chicago's been using and looking at a new citywide stormwater master plan that will allow us to actually help update the manual in such a way that it no longer becomes this one-size-fits-all for the entire city. We can start looking at individual parts of the city and what the requirements are in the West Hills with no infiltration versus the east side of Portland where we've got tremendous infiltration, and being able to approach how those areas need to comply with that manual in very different ways. And a lot of the stuff that's going to come out of that system plan is going to inform that. And so we have to wait a little while for that information to come. And once that does, then the 2016 Stormwater Manual update will include our discharge hierarchy updates, revisions, our new pollution reduction and flow control requirements. All this will be part of a pretty wide open public process. So for people who are interested and invested in how this works, we'll have the opportunity to share your thoughts and opinions on that. And then also to really clearly define separate development standards for private property and the rights of way. We do have Green Street details, and we ask a lot of private property developers to just comply directly with those details. And once again, because it's a one-size-fits-all for the entire city, sometimes, admittedly, there are situations where you're required to do something in the right-of-way that maybe doesn't have the biggest system benefit. It's still a requirement in that particular location. But now, with this more high-resolution data, we can start looking at areas and making sure that the effort that both the city and private development is going through to comply with the manual is actually lines up with what the need is in the area, as opposed to just one size fits all everywhere. And then also the Portland Green Factor. I'll talk more about that in a minute. And then I won't talk too much about this, but just kind of keep in the back of your head. I think there'll be more conversations about it. But what are the new incentives in the city of Portland can we think about doing that can help these Ecoroofs continue to grow and move forward? I hate saying this out loud also, but one of the other things we talked about are standard requirements, that you're required to do Ecoroofs in certain areas. And I think the citywide stormwater master plan might point to some areas, an example being, again, the West Hills, where there's no infiltration rates, there's landslide hazard risks, and so we can't put water into the ground there without causing potential hazards. And so that elevates Ecoroof importance in that area, because it manages stormwater where it falls. It's a 1-to-1 ratio, and it keeps it out of our system and it keeps it out of the ground. And so it's possible that a standard might be requiring an Ecoroof in that area. We don't know yet. It's just a thought. So, I don't know how much detail I should go into on this. Some of these slides came from a much more longer presentations on these, but I'll talk about them a little bit. So the stormwater manual, I'm going to call it the SWIM, if that's okay. We call it the SWIM. It's so much easier than saying things. The SWIM revision process, the first one in January of 2014, again, it's going to focus primarily on process and format. We're planning on splitting the manual into individual volumes. The idea being right now is that manual exists as an administrative rule. It's kind of difficult to update. There's different parts of it that want to be updated at different times, and so we're looking at splitting it apart and allowing us to be more flexible and agile in how we update that manual. And what that doesn't mean is that we're going to update it every 6 months or something like that. It just gives us the ability to update something like source control and pollution reduction that's very different from our development standards on a different timeline. And then 2016, again, the Phase 2 update, the more substantial content revisions and incorporating a lot of those system plan recommendations that we hope will be developed soon. A little more detail, I won't go too much further than this, but the Phase 1 update will include some treatment Appendix B updates for some of you that did deal with treatment devices. Chapter 4, our source control and pollution reduction, will be updated. And for a lot of the landscape architects and people who have to use the PAT calculator, I hope this is a good thing for you, but we're going to update that and actually hopefully make it a web-based tool as opposed to being something that's an Excel file that you have to download and deal with. And then, again, the Phase 2 revisions, discharge hierarchy, the development standards being separated from private property versus the rights-of-way. And then we talked a little bit about the potential of design overlays. I didn't say that necessarily that specifically, but the idea being that we have this one-size-fits-all, getting away from the one-size-fits-all approach and having different watershed standards, and then being able to hone in on a particular area that's got some real problems and create a specific design overlay that gives us different options. I'm going to grab a drink of water real quick if that's okay. Oh, yeah? Is it already getting that late? How much time is left? We're done? Okay. Okay. Well, we'll talk about green factor some other time. See if there's anything particularly interesting. I will say that in our efforts in the green factor, the thing that really stood out is that Ecoroofs were a really strong component of making the potential of the green factor very, very strong in Portland. And we think it's got a lot of potential to be really useful here. So there we go. Thank you very much. I apologize for taking so long.
Again, I think that there are a lot of things that we could ask Brian, and I want to encourage all of us to do so in the break and at the end of the day. And it's interesting the difference in approaches, if you will, in that our Ecoroof approach really grew out of the stormwater issues and how we would address that. And now we're broadening, and I think Chicago has had different drivers as well as stormwater, and so it'll be interesting to see how those all come together over time. Well, it gives me great pleasure now to introduce Tom Liptan. Tom is a registered landscape architect with the City of Portland, and he had worked for the city for 25 years, and he worked with us actually in sustainable stormwater and just retired this December. So now he's out on his own, so we can all share in his wealth of knowledge, and we miss him, but I know he'll be around. In Portland, Tom has really been a catalyst behind research and development of vegetated systems, both on the roof and on the ground, for buildings, sites, and street designs. He's been instrumental with the integration of these approaches in construction and maintenance standards and city code and program modifications and design. You know, I think most, maybe not most notably, but notably, he's probably got the most famous garage in the world. We've all seen pictures in more books than I can count and PowerPoint presentations. And so that's just an indication of how he's been invested in really experimenting and learning about the whole Ecoroof technology for quite some time. And he takes it very personally. So I want to welcome Tom. His presentation is a no-irrigation eco-roof design for the Pacific Northwest.
Okay, so this is my only slide. No, thank you very much. I do want to say just a couple of things that came to my mind that are not in my presentation. One of them is about a comment that Michael made about what eco-roofs are working. How can you tell if an eco-roof is successful in terms of its the health of the plants and things like that? And what seems to be happening is that a lot of people will see an eco-roof and they will view it from their perspective. And if you're, whatever you are, horticulturist, master gardener, an ecologist, you'll have a different perspective on what you see and whether it's successful or not based on that. And so it's real important to have, if we do it, or somebody does it, to have those perspectives, because what one person might say is failing, another person might say, well, that looks good. It looks good to me, must, you know. And a lot of times, especially in stormwater management, if you're really caring about getting stormwater management, do the plants, does the rain care what kind of plants it lands on and what kind of soil? As long as the plants and soil help manage the rain, in a way, you could have a bunch of weeds up there. Now, I'm not proposing that you have a bunch of weeds, but it takes some thought before we come to these conclusions about yes or no. Now, the other thing is that if it isn't doing what it was designed to do, in other words, if somebody designed that they wanted to have Canadian thistle on the whole roof, and you go up there and there's no Canadian thistle, which of course that's a weed, so who would do that, right? But that's just what popped in my mind. And so it would be like, well, if there's no Canadian thistle, then it must be a failure. But what if somehow it's all turned into sedum, and it's just sedum? Well, then somebody else would say, well, that's a success, not a failure. Anyway, so you know what I mean? So that's not my presentation. But it relates a lot, because perception is a really big deal in this industry all over the country, probably most of the world, because of how we perceive a landscape to be good or bad, or whatever term we might want to use. Anyway, this particular slide was taken a few days ago. This is the Selwood Pump Station. It's a BES building. It's about 2,000 square feet. You can see it from the bike path along the Willamette River. You can just stop and you can just stand on the bike path and you can see this roof. I'm going to show more about it later, but I wanted to show it because this roof, as you see it there with the dense vegetation, this made it through our most intense summer on record in 2012 with 0 irrigation. And this is what it looks like after it's gone through the rainy season. Interesting, huh? That shouldn't, a lot of us, including myself, would not have believed that this is possible. Now, this is a really nice shot, and I did hit the enhance button on the photo. But they all are pretty perky, there's, let's see, so let me get into this. Okay, so my garage, this is what it looks like today. So I have this pink flower. It's one of our native flowers in the Northwest. It's a Lewisia, surrounded by ripgut grass, which is a weed in the cattle industry. In the city, it's not really too big a deal, except it's not very attractive and it does turn brown. So I have to manage that. And then you might also notice that my neighbor's gutter, which is filled with my sedum. I didn't plant it there. I think somebody else did it. Anyway, and then I have an Ecoroof on my back porch, and these are some birds. Can you see them? I was so excited. I looked out the window, and there they were, and I kind of got my camera real quick, and it was just my iPhone. So there's actually 4. There's one over here on the far left, too. So it's 2 couples, I assumed. Okay, so what I'm really going to talk about is what I refer to as the red cinder roof. This happens to coincidentally be red cinder on a garage at my daughter's apartment in Buena Park, California. So go figure. Red cinder is up and down the west coast of the United States, and it must be readily available. And this is a conventional roofing method in Southern California. So this is, they used a modified bitumen roof material. I got up on my daughter's garage roof and looked underneath the red cinder. And then the red cinder here is a protection layer for the membrane, which a lot of times you use gravel and other materials. So it was interesting to run into. That was just last May that I was there and saw that. But anyway, so talking about non-irrigated, non-red cinder roofs, and I'm going to talk more about the red cinder in a minute, but we've had some experience with city buildings. So this is the Swan Island Pump Station. It was installed in 2005. This is what it looked like in 2012. And it's turned in, it was planted with 100% sedum, but a lot of the native and non-native plants in the region have colonized the roof. And when it's in 9 months out of the year, it looks like this. And then 3 months out of the year, it turns totally brown. And it's very isolated, so it hasn't been mowed yet. The typical thing in the western United States when you get a lot of tall grass and it turns brown, especially on freeways and things, is we mow it because it's a fire hazard. And potentially that is an issue in the western United States with regard to fire if you have grassy roofs. This is completely isolated out in the middle of nowhere, and it's not likely to have that problem, but that is a question as it relates to this. It's covered with sedums underneath, so interesting. This is just another one that's a non-irrigated, non-red cinder, and this is on the Gunderson building. It's their habitat roof, and this turns brown in the summer as well. Now, the red cinder idea was an idea of trying to work on this after all these years of looking at all kinds of designs and having lots of people tell me what is and isn't true about this, this concept of vegetated roofing. And there are a lot of really smart people that had a lot of good information. It was really helpful. But I started thinking, well, how do we know that a roof is doing well or not? And quite often we'll blame something on the plants, or we'll blame it on the designer, or we'll blame it on the maintenance, or we'll blame it on not having enough irrigation, or we'll blame it on the soil. And so a lot of the people in the industry, and I'm not going to name anybody's product here. If I do, it's by mistake, so we'll erase it if I do. But anyway, so these are different products. These are little sushi containers, and this is how I started looking at this red cinder idea. I started actually testing the products, the soil products that are put out by different companies. And so almost everybody's there. Quite a few are there anyway. And then I started experimenting with the red cinder idea, and I started looking at how well that worked. So, but you can see that in a sense, even though they're different in terms of how well they're doing, they're all actually surviving. I mean, you see more on the extreme right there. You can see some brown areas where it browns out in the middle, but then it comes back in the fall. So all of them work, and the cost for the media is anywhere from, the growing media, is anywhere from $30 to $90 per cubic yard. So how do you know who to buy? And I'm not going to tell you. But there doesn't seem to be a lot of difference, at least on my backyard test. Now, this is not science. I want to caution you. It's Tom's backyard testing. So this is my red cinder design, and it's in the typical tray. It's about 9 inches by 6 inches. And that's what it looked like, as you can see on the bottom right, in November. So this also went through it's actually been through 2 summers without any irrigation whatsoever at my test location. And this is what it looks like from the side. You can see the red cinder, and there's just a little bit of soil down on the bottom, so it doesn't even have much soil. Now, this test was not to see how well it manages stormwater or how well it insulates the building or anything else. It was just to see, could the plants survive without any irrigation if they were protected by this concept, which I'll tell you in just a second, how it works. And this is how it works. So the idea, and this came from years of watching this stuff, of going out into nature and then watching Ecoroofs, because I got up onto a lot of roofs, plus the Ecoroof in my garage and other Ecoroofs in my porch and things like that. But the bottom line was, it seemed that shade, when you look, especially you look in the Northwest, shade seemed to have a big contribution to the success of a lot of sedum living in our kind of climate. And I want to try and explain our climate to Michael, but he might know enough to already know it. But extremely low humidity. So when they're getting extremely high humidity in Chicago, we go down into the teens in the summertime, in the hot afternoon. At any rate, so shade plays a big factor in that. And then the idea of protecting the soil from erosion and from the potential death of the plants, and then not having coverage. So those things that Brian talked about, the guidelines for 90% coverage and everything, that came from me about 10 years ago. So it's kind of like, well, 90% didn't mean that it really had to be plants. It could be that it was also something that protected the media, especially where you get reflective heat, and you can't keep plants alive in some of these locations where the reflection from the building is just killing them, and you just might as well put some gravel over the top of it and call it good, because it'll grow in every other the other locations. So some of those things in the manual, that'd be good to kind of revisit and see how that might be addressed. So the other aspect of this, though, is then and the plants. So the top layer here, these are, if you, and I'm going to show you some pictures. But sedums really do, they have a flower, and almost all of them have a flower that's on a stem, and it looks like an umbrella. At least to me, it looks kind of like an umbrella. And I thought, well, isn't that funny? They have those little umbrellas, and you look at them in a hot sunny day, and they're shading themselves from the intensity of the sun. So they help reduce that intense part of the sun's impact to them. And then they also, what else do they do? Well, they do some other things. And I can't read that from here. And I've been having trouble with my eyes, so I can't read it here either. So you don't have to read it. But basically, it's shade. The point is shade. And finding ways to create shade. So the red cinder being a very lightweight material and very airy, when you have just a basic exposed soil layer, the sun really heats that up, and the sedums don't like that. They can take a lot of heat, but they don't like that soil heating up so much. And so if it can be buffered by something, and that's the intent of the red cinder. It's to buffer the intense heat that's coming down and to facilitate a cooler zone underneath, and it's basically a mineral mulch. And that's in the horticulture industry or landscape industry, mulch helps retain moisture. So mulch, organic mulch on a sedum on a roof is not, at least I've seen that it's not that good. So this idea of a lightweight red cinder was the idea to put in there. This red cinder also inhibits weeds. So you know the weeds aren't quite as thick or prolific as they are on a grassy or open roof, or just a regular sedum roof. And it doesn't matter underneath if you have the drainage mat or a moisture mat or anything like that. You can have the mat or you don't have to have the mat. This design doesn't care what you use. And this design is also applicable to all the different kinds of designs for you architects that are out there that have to deal with what kind of membrane and where are you going to put the insulation? Is it going to be underneath, on top, or all these other questions that you have to deal with? Those questions still need to be dealt with. This can go right on top of whatever you decide, with maybe one or two variations. Anyway, sorry about this photo. It's a Google shot. But this is our first one that was done as an official city Portland project. So this is the red cinder roof. It looks brown there because those are the flower stems, because after they bloom, they leave the flower bracket and it's kind of brown, and that's the umbrella. And this is what the roof looked like when it was first planted on my birthday, 2010. This is what it looked like June 2011. This is what it looked like May 2012. And this is what it looked like June 2012. You can see how the flowers are very prolific. You can't even see the green from the plants. This is what it looked like in November after it made it. It also made it through 2 summers without any irrigation whatsoever, or 3. No, 2 summers. And that's what it looked like. So in the wintertime, the brown kind of turns dark brown, and it may not be attractive, depending on your aesthetic. But underneath all of that brown, this is what it looks like. So if you saw it from here, you might say, oh, it's all dead. What happened? But if you look closely, it's all alive, and it's waiting. All that stuff is going to break down. It's organic, and it'll break down. And this is what it looked like a couple days ago. So the brown is still there, but it's starting to disintegrate, and then the green's coming up. And that's what it looks like. So it's not real pretty, but it works like a charm. And people that do maintenance, our city maintenance, the people that do BES maintenance, they love it when you say you don't have to irrigate. They just said, okay, that sounds good to me. And then the other thing about this is protecting the membrane, which a lot of developers and architects have said, well, if I'm going to get 2 roofs out of 1, and I'm going to keep my building for a long time, that makes economic sense for me to do an Ecoroof. Why not? And then here's our second project. This is out at it's called the Screen House at the sewage treatment plant. For all of you who have been wanting to go to the city sewage treatment plant, you should go. We've got a really beautiful building that's going up that's magnificent architecturally, and I hope in all the other ways too. But this is out at the Screen House. There's a stairway up to this, and you can go up there and you can see it. This is when it was first planted. That yellow flower is our native sedum divergens plant. So it really loves these red cinder roofs. And then, so here we go. This is that same roof in 2012. And you can see the sedums growing, and some of them grow very tall and do lots of things. That is a damselfly, if you can see it there. We've seen actually dragonflies on this roof in the middle of summer. There's no water around at all, and you usually associate dragonflies with water, but there must be some bugs up there, because that's probably what they're doing, is looking for bugs, unless they're laying eggs or something. And then here's when it has more flowers on it. It's very attractive for about a month or 2 out of the year. And this is when it browns out. See all those umbrellas sticking up there? So a lot of people don't like that. I've seen in the past people will actually cut those off because they don't like the brown look, and they get rid of them. And one other thing is, I'm not making this talking about this red cinder sedum Ecoroof as if it needs to be exclusively sedum. I mean, there are many things. It's almost like thinking about like painting a picture and you put the basic color on the canvas. This is the basic, the basis of what you could do. If you want just this, you can leave it just this. And if you want to do more, you can add bulbs to it, you can add seeds to it, and you can make it more diverse and make it actually more aesthetically pleasing as well. And this is what it looked like the other day. And you can see the red cinder. Really, you can't tell the red cinder from the red sedum because a lot of sedum turns red, and this has a lot of the sedum that turns red on it. Anyway, so this is 6,500 square feet. So this is 2 years, 0 irrigation in 2 years. And actually, we've only in 2 years, we've only pulled the weeds once. So Casey and I, Casey Cunningham with the team, we went up there last April. It took 2 of us 15 minutes to pull the weeds on 6,500 square feet of roof. And this year, there's hardly a weed to be seen, although there are a few, if you want to call them weeds. I actually don't think they're weeds. And I have a different way of looking at things. Anyway, and then this is a close-up of that same roof. So that roof right there, when you get close, in one of the parts that's kind of green and red, that's what it looks like. It's that thick. Now, there are some places where it's just the red cinder, where plants have not filled in or they haven't grown yet. And these are all planted with cuttings. So for some reason, the cuttings didn't take in certain areas, but the red cinder there, it's coverage, it's protecting the soil, and the plants will grow in as time goes by. The other thing about this idea of not irrigating is that if you have a failure and you have enough area that plants have died or not grown, the concept is in the fall to get sedum cuttings and just sprinkle them around. So in lieu of irrigation, you use replanting every fall. So you don't have to have all the pipes, you don't have to have all the water and things like that. Now, it's pretty hard for a lot of us to think, well, plants are going to die and you're actually going to watch them die and not water them. Well, yes, that's the idea, because they're finding their place and they will eventually work everything out, at least in the last 10 years that I've been looking at this idea and watching Ecoroofs. And there's a place where there is some exposed red cinder. So it's it's just a little rock that's full of holes, and it's used in the landscape industry all over the place. And then we planted, that's Emily's, I think. She brought it in, and we put it up there on the roof. Thanks, Emily. It's doing fine. Okay, now here's another one. This is the most recent one. This is and this is publicly accessible. This is the one you can see off the bike path. And so this is the Selwood pump station. This is what it looked like last year. And I just thought I'd give you some shots. So again, it doesn't matter what kind of membrane you use. There's no, this green part of the project, all those decisions have to be made. And this is the project. I'll just show you quickly. It does have the insulations on top, so it has a drain mat on top of the insulation board, and then the soil goes on top of that. And then some material there. There's only a little bit of edging at the downhill side of the facility. They're shooting the soil on there. I didn't know if any of you had seen this, so I thought I'd leave these construction shots in. Smoothing it out. I used to have in the spec that I did with the Bureau that you needed to roll it. You really don't need to roll it. Having more texture to the roof is actually probably good, because where the people are walking and you get a little more depth, it adds diversity to that. And it's as long as you put the right amount up there, you can roll it if you want. You don't have to roll it. It saves a step. It's less expensive if you don't roll it. And the edging material, we've been really eliminating the need for edging material, which is this. I guess I'm not going to be able to do that. We don't have a pointer. Oh, there is, yeah. That's right. Oh, I heard you say, you almost hit somebody. So this, instead of using the expensive material, now I know some people sell this stuff. I know it has a place. I'm not opposed to it completely, but there are some locations where you don't need the steel edging. So the steel edging's down over here at the downhill side. And at the uphill side, it's not used. And eventually the sedum just covers all that up and you can't see it anyway. And this is using fabric to separate the material. And then that's what it looked like. This is before the drought last year, after it bloomed. This is one day after we had the end of the drought, and on October 12th, the day that ended the drought, we had the highest rainfall for October 12th on recorded history in Portland. So how do you like that? We had a record drought and then a record rainfall to break the drought. And anyway, so this is what it looked like in June, and this is just one shot. Not too many people get up to a roof, but if you look at this carefully, you can see that the sedums are stressing. They're all kind of going like this, you know, it's like, oh my God, it's so hot, instead of, you know, and they're screaming. I mean, if you're there, you can hear them, you know, it's just making your heart go, oh, I want to water you, but I can't water you. If I do, I won't be able to stand up and tell people that it works. Anyway, and then this is what it looked like the other day. That's the same picture that's on the cover. And that's what it looked like in November in this location. And this is what it looked like. This does get a little bit of extra shade by some tall trees that are nearby. So in the morning and afternoon, it gets a little more. And then that's another shot of that. And then the fourth one that was done is out at Johnson Creek. And this was done, planted in March. So it's another one that made it through last summer. This is what it looked like a couple days ago. I went over there and didn't have my new pole thing, but I was using a makeshift thing. But I got the new pole thing. Thank you very much. So this has got a lot of natives. Well, not a lot. It's got two, I think, 2 or 3 natives and some other non-native sedums. It's the same thing. It's a layer of soil. It can be as shallow as 1 inch with about 2 inches of red cinder, and then various combinations of that. This one's about 3 inches of soil with about 1 inch of red cinder on top, and then cuttings. And now, just looking at another thing, so Linda had mentioned the project that we're doing with some people from Switzerland. And these are some test plots that the group wanted to put, and it's out at our sewage treatment plant. It's also open to the public if you want to see them. So these guys from Switzerland, some of you may know Stefan Boneisen and then some of his colleagues, and they came up with this idea, and all of these test plots are using materials directly from the sewage treatment plant. And those materials are the soil that's on the site that was in a big pile. They said, oh, there's a pile of soil, let's use that. So that was used. And then the compost that's out at the sewage treatment plant, which is not, it's not biosolids, it's regular compost. So it's not a sewage plant product, it's just that we have these things out there. And then they did buy straw and hay as a part of what they used. And then it was planted with some, Casey's been working on this for quite a while, and it's been planted with some potted plants, and actually Kate did too. And so it was planted, and then some seed and stuff, and then sprinkling with sedum. And the point about this is that if you look at this, you might say, well, everything looks kind of successful. I mean, I would call it a success, but now I know that you don't have the same reference that I do. So I think they're all successful. Some of them are 4 to 5 inches deep, and some of them are only 2 inches deep of material. They're all in the same location. They've never been irrigated, and they all seem to be working. So here's my favorite. If you go out there, you might pick a favorite if you're somebody like me that picks a favorite. So I like that one, and it's only 2 inches, and I think it's very lightweight, and it looks like it's, and Casey has all the information about what each particular cell is. And then close up, you can see it's got a lot of grass, and we are the grass seed capital of the world. Oregon is, so we get a lot of grass in our climate. And then there are sedums, and so this red, so there, and this has got straw as the cover, not red cinder. And so these are about 2 years old now, and when you get really close, here's our native sedum. Sedum divergens is a really tough sedum plant, and it's our native. It's tough here. On the east coast of the U.S., it doesn't do very well at all, but it really loves it here. And you can see the soil's about 2 inches, and then this is the chopstick calibrated, and these are in inches, so that's what it's growing in. 2 inches of material for 2 years with 0 irrigation, and this is what it looks like. Now, we might call, here's some kind of wild, I don't know if it's a wild geranium or if it's a invasive geranium or a non-native geranium, maybe not invasive. So there's that, and then there's these grasses, and that's just what we get in our climate if you let it go. Now, another thing, the Ramona, which was or is the largest Ecoroof in town until Walmart finishes its roof, or maybe Gray's Landing, anyway. So this is a section of Ramona, and I took this April 24th, the day before the tour, because I had to see if it was still alive. This section of Ramona does not receive any irrigation. All the rest of the roof receives irrigation. You can see that the plants look kind of richer right here, so they do better. I mean, if you water it, they will do better. But look at how well they do here. And then, to be fair, there's a close-up of what you're looking down at. So these are, and look at who's doing the best here. Sedum divergens, Sedum origanum, Sedum divergens, and these are the other non-native sedums. And isn't that interesting? Those natives. I did this to make Mary's day. If any of you know Mary, she's the sedum, she's the native person. And then I recently took a trip to Penn State for a conference, and then I thought, well, I'm going to be on the East Coast. I'll see if Ed Snodgrass would let me come over to the farm and maybe spend a week on his farm. I'm out of time, but I got to tell you the story. So I met a guy there. So Ed and another guy that's on the East Coast. This guy, doesn't that look like red cinder? Because that's not sedum. He's got little plugs in here. It's a red brick material, and it's a waste product. And so he's got his secrets about it, but because it's not used as a mulch, he's got another way that he's using it. But it was very interesting to meet him and talk about this test project. So here's Ed's approach. And this is a very steep roof. It's got a nice curve on it. And so they've got two different methods of holding the soil on. This one's inconspicuous. Here you can see Ed's. He's got the things going across. Anyway, so that'll be very interesting to see how that works out there. And then they actually gave me some samples of their stuff to put into my little sample area, which is getting bigger and bigger. So here's one of my red cinders, and this has just been planted, so these are cuttings. And then this is his material, so East Coast, West Coast. And I have to show you this, for any of you that know Ed Snodgrass. So he's on top of see, he did the other roof, so he's on top here. He's already given the guy the award plaque, and victory has been achieved by that one. Anyway, the other thing that strikes me about all this is that, NASA is putting Ecoroofs on their buildings, and they have quite a few already in the eastern United States. And I thought, kind of the red cinder with sort of the Mars idea, And then to get back, Brian made a comment about this, and I think it's a really important one for us. When are we going to be able to achieve something like this in the city? And just to refresh anybody's memory who was here last year, Dan Vizzini, who gave our keynote, said, and he was with the city of Portland, he said something to the effect, this is not a quote, but isn't it time that we actually made it a regulation to put Ecoroof on buildings? Haven't we learned enough? Don't we know enough about the benefits that we could make a pretty good case to City Council and that City Council ought to be thinking about it themselves, that really the time is nigh, and so I just leave it with that. Thank you very much for listening.
Thanks, everyone. We'll take our first break, go grab a cup of coffee and a snack and get a little sunlight. Please come back in around 10:45, and we'll have 2 more presentations and then our lunch break. Thanks again for coming today. And thank you to our speakers this morning very much.
And if we don't do it first, Chicago's going to do it and beat us.